Good morning. Thank you very much for attending this session. My name is Kuei Huang. We have three speakers, so they will introduce themselves. So I'm Hui Huang again, and I'm an epidemiologist, advisor based in New York. In this session, we are going to focus on vaccine safety. So in my talk, I'm going to cover two topics. First, I will briefly provide an overview on vaccine safety initiatives using electronic healthcare databases, EHD, in the US, including Vaccine Safety, Datalink, VSD, and post-lecture rapid immunization safety monitoring present. And then I will provide two case studies to illustrate challenges in this area. Vaccine Safety Datalink is a pioneer for using electronic health databases to evaluate vaccine safety. It was established in 1990. It is a collaboration project among CDC and 8 integrated healthcare delivery systems. So there are two priorities for VSD. The first is to evaluate safety of newly approved vaccines or new recommendations for existing vaccines. Second is to develop and evaluate new methods for safety. Before 2004, VSD had lag time approximately 12 months, which took a long time to get data. It's more like we do traditional retrospective cohort study. After 2004, the data has been updated on regular basis, which pretty much like every week. So now VSD has been conducting near real-time, evaluation. VSD has approximately 10 million population, is approximately 3% of US population. Total, they have 8 sites. 5 out of 8 from Kaiser, which is a regional health insurer in the US. The rest of 3 is from health partners and Marshfield Clinic and Harvard Pilgrim. So this slide shows VSD data sources and elements. Basically, all the VSD covers all medical encounters within healthcare plans. So you can see when a person enrolls in a healthcare plan, and then they have demographic information, enrollment information. And then, if the person goes to outpatient clinic, that will be covered, and then inpatient healthcare, like hospitalized, will be covered. And then, of course, include immunization data, as well as birth and death certificate. So I just spent a little bit of time on I think it's kind of a unique feature of VSD. It's rapid cycle analysis. This is developed to provide weekly near real-time assessment of safety of newly approved vaccines or new recommendations for existing vaccines. So for each vaccine, they select specific outcome for interest. So this outcome is based on biological plausibility. pre-licensure data or literature, and then what they do, they compare the observed number of outcome to expected number outcome. So I will point out this is hypothesis testing. It's not data mining. So because they are doing repeated testing, so they adjust for repeated testing. So one thing I want to point out is that the findings of association using this method are considered safety signal, but that doesn't mean there's true association there, but need further more studies to confirm the result. Why they move forward automatically? So for VSD has its own strengths and limitation. I think from my perspective, I think the biggest strength is it is EHR, electronic medical records. So all medical encounters are available. So compared to claims, only claimed medical events would be available. So that is, to me, this is the biggest strength of VSD. And another one is because it is EHR and it's majority of the sites from regional insurers, health insurers. So it's relatively easier to conduct medical chart review. So why we do medical chart review? Because sometimes if we want to validate the outcome of interest that identified by ICD code, so we go back to medical chart to see whether that specific outcome that are truly captured in the medical chart. So that will help us to evaluate positive predictive value of the ICD code. So in terms of limitations, I think it's the size would be a key limitation, because for 10 million, if there's a rare event, then you would be lack of sample size. So next one, I'm going to talk about present. Why this ad would advance automatically without me to push it? 它这个自己移走，我不那个按的话，它就走。哦，不，我没有动。OK， 那我自己来。哦 ，OK， be careful, the mouse moves by itself. OK, thank you， 谢谢。OK, PRESENT stands for Post-Licensure Rapid Immunization Safety Monitoring. So before I talk about PRESENT, I have to talk about Sentinel, because PRESENT is a vaccine component of Sentinel. Sentinel was established because of FADA 2007, Section 905. Based on the FADA, the FDA was going to establish an active post-marketing risk identification and analysis system to link and analyze the safety data from multiple data sources. And to do that, to access a variety of sources, including federal and private sector health-related electronic data. So this is why Sentinel was established. That was 2000. That was mini Sentinel before. And now it's called Sentinel. So FDA's vision for Sentinel is to establish a national data infrastructure to evaluate. It's moving again. Sorry. To evaluate medical product safety available to FDA as well as other stakeholders. So Sentinel's objectives primarily is to enhance Sentinel's ability to identify and investigate safety issues. Before Sentinel, FDA heavily relied on spontaneous report system to evaluate safety issues. After Sentinel, they use Sentinel to evaluate or investigate safety issues in real time. And the Sentinel also allows them to have subgroup analysis with longer term data. So this is how Sentinel works. I quickly run through. The Data Coordinating Center is, Okay, the Data Coordinating Center is a Harvard Pilgrim Healthcare Institute. Then, when FDA sent the data request, and each partner, they will go through the Sentinel Security Network portal. Then each partner receives the data request, and then they retrieve the data and run the query against their local data beyond the firewall. And the data partners reviews the results for accuracy and privacy. After that, they will send the de-identified data through the secure send portal to the Harvard Pilgrim Coordinating Center. And then Harvard will do the analysis, meta-analysis, and send the results to Sentinel, or to FDA. So originally, the presence was created by the Department of Health and Health Service in the US. It's called HHS. And the purpose was to establish a new national system for H1N1 pandemic influenza vaccine monitoring. That was in 2009. The objective, of course, is focused on, at that time, was focused on the H1N1 vaccine. But they wanted to capture rare events. This thing. I'm sorry, please bear with me. This is somehow didn't touch anything. They just goes forward without. But anyhow, probably just ask me to talk too fast. Anyhow, the data is from a National Health Insurance Plan, and this project still led by HHS, FDA, and CDC. However, in 2010, President 对不起，又开始，他自己往上跳。I'm sorry because of the technical issue that somehow the slides move forward. It's okay. 我没动，我一直 so now I mixed up. I have to. But anyhow, in 2010, Sentinel, the presence became part of Sentinel, which is vaccine component of Sentinel. So just to kind of summarize the first topic I was talking about, compared to PRISM and Sentinel, PRISM and VSD, PRISM was built on the VSD experience because VSD has been very successful. And the differences I mentioned before, I think that the key difference is that VSD uses electronic health records, but PRISM at this time primarily utilized claims administrative data. But the FDA is working on, or Sentinel is working on, to change Sentinel, the database, and change it from claims to EHR. So the agreement between is that prison utilizes data from national health plans and not a VSD site. So compared to prison versus VA-ESR, so prison is an active surveillance program, but spontaneous report is a passive safety surveillance program. However, both complement each other, so they can't complement each other without each other. So the priority for prison include signal detection, signal refinement, signal evaluation, and pandemic response and vaccine safety in pregnancy. To summarize, the PRESENT is an active surveillance program, provides a new capability for FDA. Still, but that's fine. So next two speakers, just make sure I don't touch anything, but somehow it's moving forward. See, yeah. Okay, I don't know how can. Okay, try to control it. That's kind of a distracting. Okay, so the first case study is called Pregnancy Birth Outcome Assessment in Population-Based Cohort after exposure to Trememba. So Trememba was approved for prevention again. That's frustrating. Trememba was approved for prevention of invasive meningococcal disease caused by Neisseria and meningitis group B in 2014. And the indicated age is 10 to 25. And that's by CDC recommendation was 16 to 23. At the time, Pfizer submitted biological licensure application. We have we have data from 2 animal studies. The results of those 2 studies show no effect on fertility, as well as embryonic development. And for clinical studies, we excluded pregnant women. So basically, we have no data in human in terms of the outcome or effect on pregnant women. So FDA asked us to conduct a pregnancy registry. So before I talk about the pregnancy registry challenges, I just want to talk about the traditional pregnancy registry, how typically we do. So traditional pregnancy registry usually is exposure registry. So the women exposed to the products would be asked to come to the study. So what do we do? The sponsor typically put a toll-free number on the label, and then pregnant women would call the toll-free number if they think they are concerned, or for various reasons they call that number, and then the sponsor would follow up, call back the pregnant women to find out the outcome of the pregnancy. So this graph. I'm afraid of touching anything. So the first graph shows the traditional pregnancy registry. So basically, all whoever is pregnant and is exposed to the outcome of the product of interest, and then they would call the sponsor. Here is Pfizer. And there's a few limitations. The first, because the study population is poorly defined, because we don't know who would call, why do they call. So, and then because of that, we would have a hard time to find an appropriate comparison group. It can be internal or external comparison group. And then, because the exposure is based on the self-report, so sometimes it's difficult to validate that whether that's really exposed to our vaccine. On top of that, sometimes we typically encounter significant loss of follow-up. Just for example, there's a vaccine called Registry. This is a vaccine in the same class of Trememba. This vaccine did a pregnancy registry based on what I just described. So they received 100 for 5 years period. They received 120 reports, and then the sponsor followed those women, and only 57 of those women had no pregnancy outcome. So that means whether we know they have a live birth or a stillbirth or whatever the outcome is. So this is a significant percentage of loss follow-up. So what we did at that time, we know we don't want to do the traditional pregnancy registry. So we were considering using existing data sources to do this study. So if we use existing data sources to do this registry, that would be more like the graph here. So all the patients would go to the care on the normal, the real-world setting. And then we use existing data source to collect the data on the exposure as well as the outcome. At that time, that was great timing. That's because the use of electronic health databases for pregnancy studies was evolving. VSD did a methodology study to develop and testing algorithm for gestation age and to capture pregnancy outcome. And then present at the same time, they were designing a study using Sentinel database to evaluate influenza vaccines and the birth outcome. So we take advantage of what they were doing and designed our study. So we evaluate two data sources. One is VSD, and another one is PRISM. So originally we wanted to use VSD. It's because the VSD is uses electronic health records, and all the medical encounters are available. However, after we did the sample size calculation, all those we decided VSD won't have enough sample size for our study. So we changed to PRISM. So because PRISM has a much larger population, and also PRISM has its own challenge, but we decided probably this is given the uptake of Trememba vaccine, we think the PRISM database or PRISM is a better way to move forward. So objective for Trememba pregnancy study is to estimate the incidence and the risk ratio of pregnancy outcomes in women exposed and not exposed, so we have a comparison group to Trememba up to 28 days prior to or during the pregnancy. The outcome of interest, that's mean endpoint, is spontaneous abortion and stillbirth. And then we also want to estimate the risk of stillbirth and the spontaneous abortion in the women exposed or not exposed to Trememba up to 28 days prior or during pregnancy. The endpoint here is major congenital abnormality. So this is a scheme of the study design. So what we did is using the Sentinel program, PRISM, the women we would have women exposed to Trememba and not exposed to Trememba. So there are two groups, study groups, and then they will be followed in the database, and they either have outcome of interest for both groups. exposed to treatment, but they will have outcome interest, or they don't have outcome interest. And then for non-treatment but not exposed group, they may develop outcome interest. They may not develop outcome interest. And then we would compare the rates, the rates of those two groups in terms of outcome of interest. So the timeline for this study, we designed this study in 2014 and started the study in 2015. The first 5 years, because the uptake of Trememba vaccine is slow, this is what we expected. So first 5 years, we just observed the coverage of the vaccine first, and as well as counts of the outcome of interest. If we think we accumulated enough number of the outcomes of interest, we expect most likely would be in 2021 or 2022. At that time, we would do the analysis to compare the exposed group outcomes between exposed group and the non-exposed group. So here, I will just this is a study algorithm. That's one take-home point is that we need to pregnancy study using existing database. You can't just take the ICD codes for gestation age or even outcomes of interest as face value. So what we do is that for the gestational age, we use the algorithm that developed and tested by BSD and PRISM, and to estimate the gestation age is pretty much complicated. That's just for live birth. And then for the stillbirth or multiple birth, and for other outcomes, other type of birth, we have to, based on the live birth algorithm, we have to test and develop our own algorithm. So, and then if we, based on the ICD code, we identify the event of interest, which is the spontaneous abortion, and then we will go back to the data provider for validation of the outcome. So basically to go back to the medical chart and see whether that event is captured in the database. That is going to be the same for the birth outcome. That is for major congenital abnormality. That is if we ICD code identify those events, and then we will go back to medical chart to identify those events, to verify those events. So for our study also have some limitations and strengths. I think the main challenge that, before we talk about the limitations and strengths, I would like to talk about the challenges using electronic databases. I think from operational wise, the main challenge would be those algorithms. You have to, because of the algorithm, you have to test it, and you have to go back to the medical chart to validate those codes. Sometimes those medical charts may not be available. That's because in the US, we have the national health insurers. So those charts may not be available because there's layers of approval, or we couldn't access it. However, for those regional insurers, such as Kaiser, that's not a problem. We can get pretty much 90% of those charts validated. So when you do the database, when you do the validation, that's something you need to keep in mind. What percentage of the chart you will be available? That is one. And even you have a great data source out there, some of those partners may not be interested in the study. For our study, the Sentinel has 18 data partners, and we reach out all of them. Only 9 of them are interested in the study, but several of them are not interested. 2 of them are large data providers. So that's further decrease the number of your sample size. So that is something you also need to keep in mind. So especially when the event is very rare, you have a large population in the existing data source, and then because of various reasons, the patients ended up in your study will be much smaller than whatever the database already showed you. So for the strengths of our pregnancy study, definitely is still large sample size. In US, is still very large sample size, and we can the electronic databases. The biggest advantages can identify multiple pregnancy outcomes other than just live birth. And for the comparison group, we didn't pick comparison group because they're already there. So we can set a certain inclusion and exclusion criteria to find, we think, the most appropriate comparison group. For US data, we can link to mother and infants. But there are also challenges in this area because sometimes in the US, there's no social security number for babies when they're just born. So you have to rely on link mother's last name and children's date of birth or mother's children's last name. And this is also complicated, at least in US. So the limitation, as I pointed out, even you have the larger population, you still, the data is not created for research purpose. So all those codes, ICD codes, whatever codes you use, is not complete. And you cannot take them as a face value. You need to, in some way, need to validate them. If you don't have resources to validate all the outcome of interest, you probably can take some of them, one or two, to do validation. So validation of the outcome of interest is very important. So next case study is called Monitoring Real-World Prevnar 13 Safety in China. That is a population-based cohort study used with hybrid data collection methods and outcome validation. So electronic health database in China has been rapidly growing since 2011. There are three major types of EHDs in China. EHRs from inpatient and outpatient care in the hospital, national claims databases, and population-based community EHRs. Because this is related to vaccine, so for those of you not familiar with vaccine in China, there are two types of vaccines in China, type 1 and type 2. So type 1 vaccines are mandatory and provided for children by the government free of charge. Type 2 vaccines are basically voluntary, and the people have to pay it out of their own pocket. All type 1 and type 2 vaccines are administered at China CDC immunization clinics. So Prevnar 13 vaccine was approved in China in October 2016 for prevention of invasive disease caused by S. pneumoniae in infants and children aged 6 weeks old to 15 months. Prevnar 13 is recommended of 4-dose series. So dose one dose at each of those ages, 2, 4, 6, and booster dose would be 12 and 15 months. So based on the risk management plan, we have some known and potential risks of fever, convulsion, and anaphylaxis, and apnea. So this study is designed to address the CMDA to fulfill Prevnar 13 key monitoring requirements. requirement. So this is the population-based combination, prospective and retrospective study design. We have two studies. One is a main study, which we use existing data sources in the Ningbo, the Yinzhou EHR of Ningbo City in China. And we also have a validation study, including two components. The first one is a prospective cohort within the main study. The second is to validate the outcome of interest in the main study. The population include the children 1 to 24 months receiving Provenance 13 in Yinzhou EHR database between May 1st, 2017 and July 24th, 2020. So the objectives I just listed here, we are interested in the 5 outcomes. The first is a febrile seizure, seizure, and febrile seizure, apnea, urticaria, and angina and fever. So the risk period is 0 to 10 days, or 0 to 7 days after vaccination of Provenance 13. Here is the figure to show Yinzhou EHR. Yinzhou is one of the largest districts of Ningbo City, Zhejiang Province. Yinzhou EHR started to collect its residents' medical data since 2005. By 2008, it covers all the medical encounters in its residents within hospitals and clinical and community health centers in the district. So in the district, they have 5 hospitals and 24 community health centers. So there are 4 Yinzhou CDC or Yinzhou EHR getting its data from 4 different sources. First is hospital. They have 5 hospitals here, so inpatient and outpatient healthcare data within the Yinzhou District Hospital. And then the healthcare data, outpatient healthcare data from a community health center. CDC data, that is the immunization record, and AEFI system. Another one is the only women and children's hospital in Ningbo City. They also integrated all those the healthcare data from those 4 data sources. Then the data is available in near real time. This is a flowchart for the study population. So the patients, the children, they are not patients. If they are aged 1 to 24 months, they would be eligible for the study. They have to expose, for main study, they have to expose for at least 1 dose of Provenance 13 between this period. And otherwise they won't be eligible for the study. And in order to be eligible for the prospective cohort study in a subpopulation, and they have to receive the first dose during July 1st, 2018, and July 24th, 2020. And then once they are eligible for the prospective cohort study, then they will have to sign an informed consent in order to participate in the prospective cohort study. The reason we conducted this prospective cohort study is to validate the outcomes, outcome of soft outcomes such as fever, because in EHRs, fever are not well captured, and also we don't know the degree of fever. And second is that for urticaria, we have mild urticaria and severe urticaria. So prospective cohort will allow us to collect the true incidence of urticaria, including mild and severe. So this is one of the main purposes for the prospective subgroup prospective cohort study. So for validation study, we have two components, as I mentioned. First is prospective cohort components. So when they are participating in the prospective cohort, and they will report, they complete a survey. The survey will be baseline survey for each dose, a baseline survey, and then have follow-up survey. Day 7. For each dose, we do follow-up survey. So once, if this report, children receive medical care for safety outcome of interest, and then we will abstract data from medical chart, and then those information would go to the adjudication committee, and the adjudicated outcome would end up in the validation database. Eventually, will be entered into the main study database. So for the outcome evaluation, for the main study, we use ICD-10 code to identify the safety outcome of interest 5. And then we use a data abstraction form to abstract the information from a medical chart, and then send the information to adjudication committee. Then adjudication committee would just adjudicate the outcome. Then the results would end up, adjudicated outcome would end up in the validation database. In terms of strengths and limitations of our study, the main strength is that we use in the population-based community EHR. So all medical encounters are available. And also we monitoring the safety in the real-world setting. And another one would be, for us, most important is to validate the outcomes, safety outcome of interest through two methods. One is prospective cohort, and another one is the validated ICD code for the ICD codes in the main study. For me, the main limitation is the population still is small for Yinzhou CDC because they only have 1.8 million. Prevalence 13 in China, at least in Yinzhou, has pretty good coverage. It's about now it's about 18%. However, it still doesn't allow us to do more. We think it's to do the more sophisticated analysis, which Patricia is going to introduce, talk about more, like self-case control intervals, those kind of analysis. But we plan to do that if we have enough sample size. And so that's the main limitation from my perspective. But also there's another limitation, is like potential misclassification. Before we designed this study, we did a pilot study to evaluate the Yinzhou EHR database. We realized that there are some miscoding of ICD codes. So, and by doing the validation study, will allow us to evaluate the magnitude of those miscoding or undercoding of some the codes we use to identify outcomes, safety outcome of interest. The last one, in terms of compounding by co-administration of vaccine, that's not happen in Yinzhou EHR because the feedback from the clinic, immunization clinic is that they do not co-administer type 2 vaccines together. So that means if we study type 2 vaccine using Yinzhou EHR, that's not going to be a concern. But in the US, that would be a concern. Any questions? That's all of my presentation. Thank you. Yes. I apologize for the technical issue.
Thank you, Frank May from Australia. Thank you for a very interesting presentation. I'm wondering if you could tell us the difference between ineligible and eligible people who actually enter your validation study.
You mean ineligible for the process? Because we have two...
If the slides will allow you to go back to the validation study scheme. There was one slide in which you had validation study, and the first division was to ineligible and eligible. I'm wondering if you can tell us who was eligible and who was ineligible.
Okay, so so for eligible population for the prospective cohort, they have to receive the first dose of Prevalent 13 during this period. But there are some patients that they receive second dose or third dose during this period, they are not eligible for the prospective cohort.
Thank you. It was a question which I understand that Prevnar is considered a type 2 vaccination.
Yes.
And finally, if I may ask, the question of co-administration of other vaccines, and in your small pilot study, the extent to which other vaccines were being given to children at 2 months, 4 months, and so on. It usually happens, and these outcomes, which are negative, adverse effects, it is when it's talking about fever and urticaria and so on in small children. These are very normally prevalent conditions from viral or other conditions which children naturally suffer. So this question of the specificity of this measure for your vaccine, it was the question in my mind when you discussed that point, but you have already got pilot data. So I wonder a little more information about this pilot data, excluding just normal viral infection and so on for small children who receive Prevnar or not.
Yeah, I think that's a very good question. So first, I answer your first question regarding co-administration of other vaccine. Based on our pilot study, the result, because we use let me tell you, the pilot study, we observed the co-administration type 2 vaccine, type 2 and type 1 vaccine together. So, but a very small percentage. So this is why we put as a limitation. And then the studies are going. And then we had an investigator meeting with they call the immunization doctors, and they told me they do not co-administer type 1 and type 2 vaccines together, and no type 2 vaccines together. So, and I hope I answered your question correctly.
Yes, thank you. You have answered the question.
Part of your question.
You have answered the question. Thank you very much. Did you consider having a parallel group that you could look at of children who did not receive Prevnar at the same age for the kinds of urticaria, temperature, and so on for small children, such prevalent conditions? One wonders about the specificity of this particular outcome in your study.
Thank you.
It's a wonderful study. I don't mean, just a question. Thank you.
We did. Actually, for the pilot study, we did. And I'm going to present the results tomorrow. But not fever, because the fever is not coded. I would say poorly coded, so we didn't include fever, but we include majority of the outcome of interest here. Exactly. I think from my perspective, I think the best approach would be self-paced control, risk interval, if you want to see there's a true signal or not. We had a lot of internal discussion in terms of what is the best design. Given the sample size, but we hope we have enough sample size and then we can do the self-case control and then to see at least for some outcomes whether there's a true signal or not. Thank you. Yes.
Thank you very much for very good presentation. I am Kiyoshi from Japan, and I think to have complete records of vaccination, it's sometimes challenging in many studies in many countries because vaccination is not really a usual treatment recorded in the healthcare system. And if my memory is correct, you said in the limitation, if the children are vaccinated outside the catchment area, I maybe missed. But does this mean if the children are vaccinated inside the catchment area, the record is 100% complete? Could you give me some relevant information?
Okay, I think to study vaccine in China, it's relatively, in certain ways, relatively easier in terms of capture vaccination data because all type 1, type 2 vaccines are vaccinated at CDC clinics. So they have the best data. China has the best, I would say the best immunization record compared to other countries. And that's first. And second, at least for Yinzhou CDC, that for this study, we are going to use a barcode date instead of the day they enter the barcode, they scan the barcode as a Prevnar 13 vaccination date. But for the pilot study, we use the date of vaccine to use entered by the vaccine doctors. So I think it would be very, very rare. I would say close to impossible if someone vaccinated outside of CDC clinics.
Thank you very much. It looks like China is the ideal place to study vaccine.
Yeah, I think so. But the challenge is that it's difficult to link. You have to the local CDC or prevention CDC or country CDC, whatever, are willing to share the data with other data partners. So that is a major challenge.
You have skipped the challenge. I have one question. Is there a particular reason why you chose the Yinzhou district over all the areas in China? Because would the results of this study conducted in Yinzhou district be representative of the whole area in China?
That's a very good question because for type 2 vaccines are paid by parents or paid by whoever is going to receive the vaccine. So still considered expensive. So the only, I would say, families financially well off maybe afford those vaccines. Yinzhou is one of the biggest districts of Ningbo city. Ningbo is developed financially well off city or economically well off city. I would say it would be the results of the data can be generalized to the population, like children population that receive Prevnar 13 treatment. It's unlikely. I think for children living in third tier or fourth tier cities in China may have limited exposure to Prevnar 13. Most likely would be first tier or second tier, from first and second tier. That's a very good question. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yep. The last question, because we have other speakers. Yeah. Yes, please.
PCV Sentinel vaccination, because in China there are ongoing discussions from both the NAMI group or the social media regarding the safety and adverse effect of vaccines. So my question is, in the prospective study design, how will you assess the relationship, the cause and effect relationship between the vaccine use and adverse effect? And another question is about the sample size, because you have also mentioned in your presentation, even with the registration database or the large database, the sample size may not be sufficient to identify very rare AE or rare AE. So what's the ideal sample size to make this judgment? Or are you going to do some other studies in other areas which can use as a continuing study or follow-up study to make the decision or judgment on the adverse effect? Thank you.
Yeah, I think to answer your question in terms of sample size, so definitely for febrile seizure and seizure, we don't have okay, when we talk about sample size, we definitely first think about hypothesis testing. For the primary objective for our study is not hypothesis testing, but still we need an estimated incidence of safety outcome for interest. So still, it's a concern. Yes, for febrile seizure, definitely we don't. And in terms of, actually, like Frank already asked some similar questions in terms of your suggestion, different population. We did a pilot study, so it's a much larger sample size. That will show us the incidence of febrile seizure in the Yinzhou children in a similar age group. What is the background rate? So if we don't have enough sample size to do the do the hypothesis testing, but we can contextualize our results based on the results from pilot study.
Good morning, everyone. So first, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me here and give this presentation. I'm Ting Wu from Xiamen University. So today I will share with you some of our experience in post-licensure clinical study of our recombinant hepatitis E vaccine. So the hepatitis E vaccine, HER3 with a brand name Datalink. It is the first and the only licensed hepatitis E vaccine in the world currently. So our institute in Xiamen University, together with Innovax, a vaccine manufacturer in Xiamen, we together developed the vaccine after 14 years development. And the vaccine was licensed in 2011 in China. It was marketed on the market in 2012. Until now, it is only licensed in China, and we have passed the audit from the Pakistan FDA, and hopefully this vaccine will license in Pakistan at the end of this year or early next year. So first, I would like to briefly introduce the background of this disease. HEV is the leading cause of acute viral hepatitis globally, especially in Southeast Asia and Africa. It is the second or the first most important cause of acute hepatitis in adults. And in this area, and in Europe, now more and more autochthonous hepatitis E cases were reported. And in the United States, as currently there is not a licensed HEV test reagent in the market, so clinically they do not test for HEV infection in the hepatitis patients. So very little cases were reported in the United States. And here is data from the WHO. So every year there were more than 20 million HEV infections with 3 million clinical cases and 56,000 HEV-related deaths. And globally, there were outbreaks of hepatitis E with tens of thousands of cases in recent half century. The biggest one is in Xinjiang, China, with 119,000 cases. And in China, HEV infection has exceeded HIV infection to be the #1 cause of acute viral hepatitis since 2012. And now the using of diagnostic assay for HEV is only 20% of that of HAV reagent. That means the disease burden of hepatitis E is still being underestimated. And the mortality rate is higher for HEV than HAV infection. The mortality of acute hepatitis E in general population is around 0.5 to 4% worldwide. But there were some high-risk populations. Because in the phase 3 clinical trial, we usually only consider the relatively healthy population. And in post-licensure clinical study, we would consider more for this specific population. And the high-risk population include the pregnant women, old people, patients with liver disease patients, and immunocompromised patients such as HIV carriers or the solid organ transplanted patient, and children and children to highly endemic area. So in the pregnant women, the mortality rate is more than 20% after they contract hepatitis E. And these are data from the Donghai, is our surveillance data. The morbidity in the old people is higher than younger people. HEV infection in younger people more tended to be subclinical infection, but in old people it would more likely to be a symptomatic infection. And for the mortality in HEV superinfected, decompensated chronic liver disease patients are higher than HEV non-infected. And for usually after HEV infection, the hepatitis C tend to be acute hepatitis, but in HIV carriers or in some kind of immunocompromised patients, the infection might tend to be chronic infection. This is a paper published in AJM, and these people has abnormal ALT for more than 2 years. So in phase 3 clinical trial, we only enrolled healthy adults aged 16 to 65, and we totally 112,000 participants were randomized to receive the HEV vaccine or the control HPV vaccine. and we followed them after the 3 doses of vaccination. We followed them for another 1 year and get enough acute hepatitis cases, and we use this data for the licensure of this vaccine. So so in the phase 4 clinical trial, we need to consider the long-term efficacy, long-term immunopersistence of this vaccine, and the long-term safety of this vaccine, and also the efficacy, immunogenicity, and safety of this vaccine in some specific population, and the optimized immunization schedule, especially in outbreaks or for those travelers who wish to get immunized in a very short period, and the co-administration with other vaccines. So we designed several studies to try to answer all these questions. So we have designed several phase 4 clinical studies for this vaccine. Some have been finished, and some of them is ongoing. So the first is the long-term efficacy, immunopersistence, and safety study of this heparin. This is the extended follow-up study of our phase 3 clinical trial. As I have mentioned, the phase 3 is 19 months, and after that, we kept follow all these people for another 8 years, and now we have followed them for 10 years. We finished this study at the end of last year. We have the data of the 10 years after vaccination. So for the safety, long-term safety data, we get the personal report from the participants, and from the report from the village doctors, and also we get the data from the local medical insurance system. And for the efficacy, long-term efficacy data, we have set up a very sensitive hepatitis surveillance system locally. I will introduce later. And for the immunopersistent data, we took the blood from the participants in the immunogenicity subset every year. We take them every year, around 10,000 participants from two townships. So totally we have 10 townships locally. So the trial was conducted in Jiangsu province, in Dongtai city. So we are here in Xi'an, and Dongtai is in Jiangsu, north of Shanghai. We enrolled participants from 10 townships from Dongtai. And we have set up a sensitive hepatitis surveillance system in Dongtai. We have several Sentinel clinics, 162 community clinic centers, and 11 hospitals in townships, and some 30 personal clinics. And also we have 2 central hospitals in Dongtai city. And all the doctors in this clinic, Sentinel clinics, were trained. And for those villagers who were fatigued or loss of appetite for more than 3 days, they were requested to take blood. So those who were fatigued and loss of appetite for more than 3 days, they were called suspected hepatitis cases. And the blood sample would be sent to a local Dongtai CDC, and it will be tested for ALT. If his ALT is higher than 2.5 times of upper limit of normal ULN. They will be typed for hepatitis. They will test it for HAV IgM, HCV IgG, HBV IgM, and HEV IgM, HEV IgG. So if he has if his HEV IgM is positive, and then the patient would be followed up in 2 or 3 weeks, and the blood sample would also be tested for ALT. And the patient would be kept follow up every 2 to 3 weeks until its ALT became normal. So we have serial blood sample of the patients. And all this serum sample would be sent to Xiamen University to our lab, and we will detect the HEV markers, HEV IgM, HEV IgG, and IgG quantitative analysis, and also HEV RNA, and to further diagnose of these patients. Also, we have designed a website to enter all this data, and to do data analysis and some quality control. So this system covered the 400,000 people in this 10 townships. Among them, 110,000 people were the participants in our phase 3 clinical trial. And also we have software to collect the fingerprint of each of the participants in our phase 3 clinical trial. And also we have their photo and recorded in our software. So during the follow-up for those hepatitis cases, we would confirm their identity through the fingerprint and their photo. And also we would compare the data of each year, the number of suspected hepatitis patients and those who have abnormal ALT, and the number of confirmed hepatitis cases. We would analyze all these data to make sure the system is highly qualified. And through this system, we have get the long-term efficacy data of this vaccine, and we have published the data until month 56 after the vaccination, and published the data in New England Journal of Medicine. So the efficacy is very high. In per protocol set, it's 93%, and in the intention to treat set, it's 86%. And also we get the immunopersistence data. And also we have reported the safety data of Hecolin to the Global Advisory Committee on Vaccine Safety. And they think the safety data of this vaccine is reassuring. So this is the study in elderly people. In phase 3, we enrolled participants aged from 16 to 65. Although the vaccine was approved to be used in people older than 16 years old, we still lack the immunogenicity and safety data of this vaccine in those who are older than 65. So we conduct this trial in those who are older than 65 in Zhejiang province. This is an open label study. And we have 3 groups. Totally, the sample size is 600. So we have 3 groups. One group is the elderly people. They received the 3 doses of Hecolin. It's a test group. And the second group is the immunogenicity control group. We enrolled 200 participants aged 18 to 65 as an immunogenicity control group. And also we enrolled 200 elderly people aged older than 65 as a safety control group. These people, they did not receive any intervention, any vaccination, but they were requested to fill all the safety diary card during the 7 months, the 6 months of vaccination, same as this group. So this is a safety control group. And this study is finished. We have submitted the paper to journals. And this is a study in chronic hepatitis B patients in Shandong province. Because I have said the hepatitis super infection of HB, super HB infection in baseline chronic liver disease patients. The prognosis would be very poor. So we conducted this study. This is also an open label study. And we have 2 groups. The first is the healthy this is the control group, the healthy volunteers with negative HBsAg and negative HBe IgM and negative HBe IgG. And for the chronic hepatitis B patients, they were positive. They have positive HBsAg. And their ALT is less than 1.5 upper limit of normal. And they have negative HBe IgM and IgG. So all of them received 3 doses of heparin. And they were analysis for the liver function at month 1, month 0, month 6, before the first and the third dose, and at month 7, and at 1 month after the third dose, to analysis the impact of this vaccine to the liver function of these hepatitis B patients. And this is a study for the co-administration with recombinant hepatitis B vaccines. This is a randomized open label study in Beijing, in Caoyang CDC. And these people were randomized to receive the together with HE vaccine and HPV vaccine. And another group received HPV vaccine only. And the third group received HPV vaccine only. To analyze the immunogenicity and safety in this population. And this is an accelerated vaccine trial. So this is conducted in Zhejiang CDC. And this is a randomized open label study. We enrolled participants older than 18 years old and received 3 doses of heparin at 0, 7, and 21 day. Means they received the vaccine at 0, 1, and 3 weeks. And the other group received the vaccine at the regular schedule at 0, 1, and 6 months. So we try to analyze to compare the safety and immunogenicity of the accelerated vaccination schedule compared with the standard vaccination schedule. And this is a study in pregnant women because the mortality of hepatitis E in pregnant women is very high, it's more than 20%. So this is a very important target population of HPV vaccine vaccination. But in China, it's very difficult to conduct such kind of study. And an institute, the International Center for Diarrheal Disease Research, ICDRB in Bangladesh, they applied for funding from the Norway government and they were supported with more than 5 million US dollars to conduct this study. So this is a randomized, controlled, double-blinded study. It is now ongoing. They enrolled healthy women aged 16 years to 39 years. They were non-pregnant at enrollment. They were randomized to receive the HPV vaccine happily or the control HPV vaccine for 6 months. The sample size is 20,000. So they would like to analyze the effectiveness of this vaccine in preventing HPV disease during pregnancy. So at enrollment they were non-pregnant then, and they will analyze the efficacy of this vaccine during pregnancy after they have been vaccinated. So these are the news on their website. So the third part is the pharmacovigilance. The company are responsible for this part of work. Because we are preparing for the pre-qualification PQ of this vaccine. We're preparing for the WHO pre-qualification. So we invite some experts from PAS to give us some comments to set up our pharmacovigilance system. So we have set up all this. We have building all these blocks for efficient quality system for pharmacovigilance, including the PV contact person for communicating at the national level, and we have set up the organization and the operation unit for PV, and training the PV staff, and all the colleagues in the company. Our sources of data is the AEFI report system and the ADR monitoring system in China, and also the data from the complaint system, from the users of the vaccine or from the salespeople of the company. And also we have the monitor performance of PV system and the record management and data retention. And the documentation of all the quality system and also the auditing of this PV system. So we have set up all these blocks and try to improve them. And so now we have established an independent pharmacovigilance system with the support from PAS. And for each step of the pharmacovigilance, we have set up the relative SOPs for each step of this work. And now we have some major challenges for the PV system. The lack of robust and validated PV system, and we lack of expertise to perform pharmacovigilance activities both in the domestic and the international market. And we lack of policy support. We have difficulties in integration of data from different vigilance systems. Also, there are some challenges in integration of the PV into public health programs. For this part of a job, we are working on it, and we try to improve it. Okay, that's all for my talk. Thank you.
My name is Honol Jong. I'm from Korea. My question is, for all your RCTs, your first inclusion criteria were healthy adults. Is there a particular criteria that has to be met to be considered healthy?
Sorry.
Is there a particular criteria or specific conditions to be classified as healthy?
You mean in the phase 3 clinical trial?
Yes.
We have inclusion and exclusion criteria. We have very detailed inclusion and exclusion criteria, and we would because this is a clinical trial of a vaccine, we would not have a physical examination for each participant. So we judged whether it is healthy through the investigators will ask them several questions, and according to the inclusion and the exclusion criteria, if he meets the inclusion criteria and unmet the exclusion criteria, he was thought as healthy, relatively healthy.
Okay, thank you.
Hello, so my name is Sarah Welder from GSK in Belgium. So maybe I missed it during your presentation, but you were talking about the pharmacovigilance system that you've set up in China, if I'm correct?
Please slowly.
Sorry. So maybe I missed it in the presentation, but you were mentioning the pharmacovigilance system that you set up in China with the support of PATS, correct?
Yeah, because yes, we are preparing for the WHO PQ, so we invite some experts from PATS to help us to improve our PV system.
Yeah. My question then is, what are the data sources that because in your blogs, you had different blogs, and one of the blogs is you mentioned that you were looking at different data sources for the pharmacovigilance. So my question is, what are the data sources that you were looking for? Is it like electronic health records and claims data? Is there anything else that you included?
Yes. Our data source from the AEFI report system. It is from the CDC, and also from the ADR monitoring system, and also we have the 400 telephone. The compliance system from the vaccine users or from the salespeople of the company.
Right. Okay. And for the integration, do you mean like merging the different data between them, or just you append all the data together?
Sorry, this part of job was responsible by Innovax. In fact, I do not know the details of this work.
Okay, no, that's fine. Okay, maybe I'll take you during the break. Okay, thank you.
So while we are setting up the slides, I'm just going to introduce myself. I'm Patricia Sadier. I work at Merck. And my topic today is, thank you very much. This one for that. Thank you. To go quickly over some self-control characteristics of vaccine safety studies. So I don't know if we can go a little over time because I only have 15 minutes, it sounds, with what's left. But we'll do what we can with this time. So I'm just going to give a little background on self-control design and then present the top two kind of most popular self-control designs. So self-control, understand it as meaning using the subject as their own control, using people as their own control. That's basically what self-control means. Some characteristics make vaccine really suitable for self-control studies, and they've been used in safety of vaccine for many, many years, and start being used on the drug side now. And that's not unusual for vaccines to be at the forefront of methods that have been designed for vaccines initially and refined little by little going to the drug side. So vaccines, as you know, you all were vaccinated as kids. They are broadly used, and ideally you would want almost everybody to get vaccinated for vaccines that are preventing infectious diseases in healthy people. And as a result, it becomes difficult sometimes to find unvaccinated people for your comparison, or they are kind of weird unvaccinated people because the reason why they weren't vaccinated make them special and different. So the large number of exposed vaccinated people is one characteristic of vaccine safety studies. The exposure, on the other hand, is relatively simple. It's usually a single dose, or sometimes just 2 or 3 doses, a few months apart, so a very easy exposure compared to the drug, for example, exposure. And vaccine information is usually well recorded, well captured in different ways, vaccination booklet cards, etc. So you have this information on the exposure pretty handy. On the event outcome side, we're going to call it health outcomes of interest, HOI, in this presentation. Typically, we focus on events that are both acute and brief. So they start shortly after the vaccination, and you'll see we'll talk about risk windows a little bit. Usually, this risk window is short, a few days, a few weeks after the vaccine. And the relevant risk window, which we'll discuss a little bit, it depends on both the outcome and the vaccine. Sometimes for the same outcome, different vaccines, you would expect the outcome to occur at different times after the vaccine, and we'll see a couple of examples as well. And they usually also resolve quickly, they are brief, which gives you an opportunity in a short period of time to observe several of them. Assuming these occurrences of the same outcome are independent, meaning like the risk of having a second one is not related to the fact that you had the first one, then you can use all of them actually in your study. And we'll see also that to use meaningfully a self-control design, it's better if this event is also not a contraindication to the vaccine. But there are ways to go around that if it is. So this is kind of a general graph of self-control design that we'll go over because that's the basic graph that we're going to use. The pointer. So typically, you have what we call the risk interval or risk window, which is a time period that you determine during which, after the vaccine, if the event occurs, you consider that it's more likely to be related to the vaccine. So a period during which it makes sense from a biological standpoint and everything you know about the vaccine, to consider that the event may be related to the vaccine, if it occurs there. And then the rest of the period could be used as a control period. Typically, you use the period that is after the vaccine, a control interval that is post-vaccination. And since you don't always really know when exactly, it's pretty arbitrary to determine your risk window. If you say it's 30 days, if something happens on day 31, is it really in the comparison or is it still in the risk window? Sometimes you implement what's called a washout period, so a period during which you don't consider that the events that occur then belong to either the risk or the comparison window. So washout period is optional, but often done. And then you have an issue with this short period of time here before the vaccine during which you think if, for example, the kid is sick during that time period, it's unlikely that the kid would get a vaccine at the time he is or she is sick. So there's this time period during which you think that if the kid really got the vaccine here, it probably was a healthy kid right before getting the vaccine. And that's called the healthy vaccinee period, which is usually also a period that you don't use as a comparison period. You exclude it from the comparison period. So if you want to use the time period before the vaccination, you use a pre-vaccination control interval that is before that healthy vaccinee period. And sometimes it's hard to determine how long this healthy vaccinee period will be. It depends on the outcome, and it's a little bit arbitrary. So some people prefer completely not to use a pre-vaccination comparison period at all, and just use the post-vaccination time as comparison. So some of the key features of self-controlled design is that inherently they control for everything that is fixed in the person that is vaccinated. So any medical history is the same before or after vaccination, right after vaccination, and in the comparison period. Everything that's fixed is automatically controlled for. You've seen in the previous presentation that sometimes there's a real struggle to find a comparison group that would look like the vaccinated group. Because it's hard to match people on everything that they may be different on. So that takes care of it, self-control takes care of it. What it doesn't take care of is things that may change over time. For example, age, if your risk and comparison windows are apart from a few months apart, that may be sufficient for some outcomes that have a very different incidence by age. Say the first year of life, there may be very different incidence of febrile convulsion. In the second year of life, very different incidence of intraception. We'll see that for rotavirus in the first year of life. So these influences, these you need to take care and to take into account when you do the analysis, and you need to adjust for these differences. Changing age, same thing for seasonality. If your outcome is more frequent, for example, in the winter time, when when kids have a lot of fever, they may have more febrile convulsion, then you would have to also adjust for that. But everything else is kind of taken care of, so that's kind of nice. Risk window, this is an important aspect of any safety study design. You choose it very wisely depending on what exactly you want to study. And even the same outcome, like a febrile convulsion, you may use a different time window of interest risk window depending on the vaccine that you are studying. So for example, you would expect a febrile convulsion to occur within a couple of days of a vaccine containing pertussis. As if you look at a measles containing vaccine, the febrile convulsion will occur more likely around the time the measles vaccine strain replicates, around a week after the vaccine. So the time period that you would be interested in is more around a week after the vaccine. So same outcome, different risk window. So it has to be biologically sound the way you choose the risk window. But that's true for any safety study. You use the day of vaccination as your index day, but as we said, typically this information is fairly available and accurate. On the outcome side, you look, so in this graph that we have, you look for the occurrence of the events after vaccination in the risk window and in the comparison period, and you compare basically the incidence or the occurrence of these events. You can also look at multiple events if you want in the same study. You can even do what we call fishing expedition or general safety, which has studies that are done relatively commonly after a new vaccine is licensed and put on the market, to have real-world safety data and detect rare events that may not have been detected during clinical trials. So you could look at all the events, for example, that result in hospitalization or ED visit, if you wanted, and compare their occurrence in the risk window versus the comparison window. That's also a nice way of doing general safety. So self-control, again, can be used for that. So this is the example of the first kind of common self-control study design that is used. It's called self-control risk interval. That's a PRISM nomenclature. You heard about PRISM before. So it's kind of like a cohort study, and you include all the vaccinated people in your study. Everybody you know was vaccinated, so it's a good study to do if you have good information on the vaccine status of people. And so you include them when they are vaccinated, you look at whether they have the events during the risk period, and you compare to your self-comparison period, usually a post-vaccination period. So you use only the vaccinated people. That's an advantage of this design. And typically, only the vaccinated cases, so the subjects who were vaccinated and had an event, will contribute to the analysis. So that's relatively cost efficient in terms of design. Once you have all your vaccinated, you have to identify the cases. And as was mentioned in previous presentations, the validation of the case is also an important aspect of these studies, but that's true again for any study. So in this design, basically you self-match the risk control intervals. Each subject contributes one risk interval and one or more control intervals, usually again post-vaccination, but if you want, you can use the pre-vaccination if you're sure this will not introduce any bias. You can assess multiple occurrences of the event if these occurrences are independent of each other. And again, this self-control design will take care of time-fixed confounders, but not age or seasonality, which you will have to control for in addition. And then you do a match analysis. So one example of that is a study that was published, part of PRISM studies, of intraception, which is it's intestinal invagination that can occur in young children and has been described after rotavirus vaccination with a slightly increased risk of intraception after rotavirus vaccination. So there was several large studies have been done to look at this risk, more focused risk on intraception. And in this design, classically, you took all your children vaccinated with the vaccine and looked at whether they developed intraception within either the risk or the comparison period, and then analyzed this data. In that particular study, the authors looked at two different risk windows, the first 7 days and the first 21 days. And they used a control interval of 21 days immediately starting after the risk window. So no washout period if you want. So we'll see examples of the other very popular self-control design. It's called self-control case series methods. So as much as the first one was more like a cohort type of study, this one is more like a case control study. So you start with the cases and you identify all of the cases that occur within a pre-specified time period. So if you want, you can pre-specify that time period as being 1 year. Could be the year 2018. All of the cases that occurred in 2018, or it could be an age time period. It could be the second year of life, for example. So you pre-specify your time period and you identify all of the cases that occurred during your period of observation. And then among the cases, you assess their vaccine status. The advantage of this design is that you only need to assess the vaccine status of the cases. So if you deal with an outcome that is relatively rare, where you don't have too many cases to evaluate and confirm, and you have a hard time having the vaccine information, this is a very economical design where the vaccine information will only be needed among the cases. And you determine basically on this, if you go back to this, you determine whether when the subjects receive the vaccine. So you have the cases, and then you determine when the vaccine doses were received. You could have received several during that period of observation, and you have pre-specified your risk window, and then you look at whether this case occurred during the risk window or not. So it's kind of a case control design. You start with the cases, and you look at exposure or not. And you use your entire period of observation to do your analysis. So, same thing, so you define your period of observation, and the self-control design will take care of the fixed confounders that you still need to control for age and seasonality if the incidence of your outcome changes with age and seasonality. Something I didn't mention on the rotavirus example, the incidence of intrasusception changes a lot during the first year of life. Very, very different by a week almost of age, so you have to adjust very carefully for age in that example. Let's see if we can go real fast. Again, you can also evaluate multiple exposures if you want, and multiple occurrences of the event of interest. This is an example of how you can try to adjust for either difference in seasonality, for example. You can use the unvaccinated group to look at background rate of your event among unvaccinated people and use that to match, say, month by month, year of follow-up to adjust, for example, for seasonality. If you have an issue with seasonality, for example, for febrile conversion, that will be more frequent in the winter. So you can use your unvaccinated to help adjust for differences in age or in seasonality. This is an example of a self-control case series that was done already 10 years ago by a group in the UK looking at febrile conversion occurring after MMR vaccine, so very, very classical vaccine. And in that example, they looked at febrile conversion as it could be related to two components of MMR, the measles component, where you would expect febrile conversion or fever to occur more around a week after the vaccine, and the mumps component, where the fever tends to occur more around 3 weeks after the vaccine. So they determined two different risk windows, one around 1 week and one around 3 weeks. And using this design, they looked at all the cases of febrile conversion that they had here during the second year of life, starting at 12 months, ending at 24 months, and looked at when children may have received MMR during that time period, and analyzed that as a matched case control study, pretty much. So there's a large choice of design that can be used to do vaccine safety, and the choice is based on the question that you have, the type of event, and the potential for confounding. We've seen in previous presentation that it's sometimes challenging to find a good comparison group that would be that you would be able to use to compare meaningfully to your vaccinated group without any bias. And basically you can mitigate that by trying to restrict or try to match people. But the self-control design is really a good way of taking care of a lot of the potential confounders if you can use it. Still, it's limited to acute events and brief events. so cannot use it for everything. There are many limitations also, difficult to use for very serious events like death. There are limitations on how you use it for events like that, or that you cannot have several times during your observation period. But it's a good way, it's a good type of design to take care of a lot of confounding at once. And again, as mentioned at the beginning, it has been used in vaccines for many years, and it's starting to be used on the drug side. So again, vaccines are as often at the forefront of methods here. Thank you.
Thank you for the presentation, and I'm Diana from National Taiwan University. So you mentioned earlier that for studies, self-control studies, the contraindication should, because contraindication prevents patients from receiving the vaccines. So I was wondering, how do you get around this in the rotavirus intersusception study? Like, how do you, because like after it's licensed, I noticed that in the label it does say that intersusception is a contraindication for rotavirus vaccine. So how do you conduct this study?
So I don't know if it's truly a contraindication or simply a precaution, because we've seen a lot of cases where kids who had an episode of intersusception after first dose will get the second dose or the third dose. So you still have the exposure, but if you use the design as was used by PRISM, for example, they only use a post-vaccination comparison period. So in that case, you would not expect a new vaccine there, but you could still see intersusception occurring. So that way you avoid basically using pre-vaccination as a comparison in that case. So you use just a post-vaccination comparison period. And you would not expect to see several vaccinations, like several doses. You'll only have one dose. If it's truly a contraindication, if it's a true contraindication.
Thank you.